It's really nice to be here, particularly among people who actually spend a lot of their time doing stuff that, you know, I mean, many people just wouldn't bother doing what you guys do. And so I'm quite actually humbled to come along and talk to you, because you're doers rather than just listeners. So that's just lovely. And in that sort of spirit, I mean, this is not one great expert talking about the Antarctic. 14 million square kilometres, and I've been to a tiny wee part of it and spent most of my time in an area which is about 4 kilometres wide and 1 kilometre sort of deep, and that's it. That's all I really know about, to be honest. So it's tiny. So, you know, a marine biologist in Antarctica, it's a bit of a misnomer, to be honest. But at the same time, I got there. I've wanted to be there since I was 5. So getting there, how do you get there? It's a bit of a trek, actually. I thought getting back to Glasgow was hard, but actually getting to Antarctica is quite difficult. This is having flown from London to Spain, from Spain to northern Chile, or central Chile, and then from central Chile to southern Chile, and then getting on a small plane which is designed for city hopping to fly the last 1,000 kilometres across to Antarctica. And this is from the cockpit, and this is my first sight of Antarctica. It was really embarrassing, to be honest. I'm no longer just a middle-aged gentleman, I'm a little bit beyond that, but I was running around like a giddy schoolboy, taking pictures, wanted to be up in the front, and I had these seasoned people looking at me as if, I'm going to spend time with this man. It's really scary. It was just amazing to see. It's so incredible to fly across 800 kilometres, 900 kilometres of sea, and I just couldn't get away from the window just to watch, and it was just the sea with a couple of icebergs, and then there was this huge big ice sheet that must have been colossal, but it was difficult to get the scale, and then we saw Graham Land, and this was the first sign of the Antarctic Peninsula. And as you're flying over it, it's just amazing, because I know the theory, I've taught a lot of the theory. Here we are, we're heading into the austral summer, the ice is melting, that's what makes everything happen in that part of Antarctica. The ice melts, it means that there's room on land for birds, and I was going to say birds and penguins, that just sounds a non-zoological thing to say, but for creatures to actually come onto land and to start reproducing and doing the stuff they do. And of course, the marine life just takes off. And as you're flying over and watching these areas which are opening up, and just the scale of it as you're flying over. I remember first flying over the Rockies and thinking, this is spectacular and big. This was just mind-blowing, to be honest, and difficult to put into words. And the pictures don't really tell anything. The propellers are turning, so don't worry. the cat that got the cream. That's what it was like. One of my colleagues took this and he said, you know, I've just got to get a picture. You're smiling from ear to ear here. To actually be on Antarctica, somewhere that's been isolated for what, maybe 20, 40 million years. Spent a good bit of time in the Canadian Arctic, and it's amazing being in the cold and drilling through ice and taking refrigerators to keep things warm. But it's completely different when you go and you feel you've actually crossed something. You've crossed some sort of real divide. In the Arctic, you can actually sometimes get a train or a car back if you're really cold and you're really fed up. Here you're sort of stuck. You really are isolated, and you feel as if you're in the most isolated place on Earth, and you are. This is, just very briefly, so this is the tip of South America. Here you go to Punta Arenas, where Shackleton spent so much time, and of course you go to the Shackleton bar, but you're there for a couple of days, and he was there for months and months. Well, hopefully anyway. And so you fly across from the South America across to the peninsula here. This is the peninsula, and about midway along this peninsula you have Graham's Land, Margarita Bay, and there's a tiny little slither of land here which is you don't see until you're about to land. It's the British base at Rothera. It's absolutely tiny in the feature of things. And it's funny because I'm looking out for this base, people saying, well, we're coming into it now. I couldn't see anything. You know, and it was only when you're really, really close and you get folk who are saying that's the base down there, and it's just like watching a whole bunch of little ants, except that you don't see the people, you just see things moving around, which are probably trucks. You get there, but you've got to live there. Getting there is quite an adventure. I mean, it took 2 days. No, actually, it didn't take 2 days. It took 7 days to get there, 2 days of flights, and then we get stuck in Punta Arenas because of weather. And that was quite interesting. But when you get there, you think, okay, I'm about to start work. But you're not just working, you're having to live there. What is that like? It's not bad. It's actually not bad. There's 3 cooks, and all of them are really good and all competing with one another to make the best meals possible. And I'm telling you, it makes a huge difference. I've never eaten so well as here. In fact, you have to be really careful. I'm sure that the reason I'm so fat just at the minute is because of Antarctica. It was excellent food. But here's rather a point. This is where you come into land. This is the base here, and this is looking out across east to a whole bunch of mountains in a place called Pourquoi Pas because of the French who explored it. This was explored by the French in 1906. Which is incredible, really. You think of places being explored in the 17th century and the 16th century and the 15th century. But here, the French, 1906, came down and looked for it. The base is relatively recent. Once you're on the base, there's nowhere really to go. I mean, you can walk round, which we sort of did every day, or you can go across and you can ski here, if you want to do that. But apart from that, you're sort of stuck. You can take small boats out to some islands, which I'll show you in a minute, 2 or 3 kilometres away. But it's only 2 or 3 kilometres away, and it's not that far. So you actually feel quite closed in a very, very big place. This is the base. This is just looking across behind the base. It's just spectacular. One of the things that got me was that I arrived austral summer. It's 24 hours daylight. And even when I stopped work, I just didn't want to go to bed. I just wanted to sort of take it all in. And again, this sort of giddy schoolboy. And there was quite a few times I'd just go down to the pier and watch the whales or watch the seals. And it's 3 o'clock in the morning, you think, goodness, I've got to get up and work. But it was actually intoxicating. I knew it was going to be amazing, but I couldn't really have prepared for it. Not really. But there were parts that I found quite difficult, I must confess. This killed me. This absolutely killed me. The fact is that when you're in Antarctica, you really are isolated. And you are to a large extent on your own, particularly if the weather's bad. You don't just sort of call an ambulance or call the fire brigade. You are the ambulance, you are the fire brigade. And I don't just mean people there who are trained, because you have to do a week's course at Girton College in Cambridge before you go. And they teach you things like, how do you put bandages on people who have broken their legs? And you're expected to actually take part in that. The health and safety is it seems over the top until you're there and you realise they've got it just right. When things go wrong, they go seriously wrong here. And one of the reasons they don't go wrong so much is because they're really hot in the health and safety. No matter which building you're in, you have to tag yourself in. You have to. This little tag has to be where you are. I'm hopeless at that. I think I belong to a generation of academics where if someone tells you you've got to tag yourself in, no. No. Something in my heart says, no, I want to be sort of free. We can't be free here. And the number of times I was hunted down by these people called saints, it was a bit like The Prisoner, where they would come running after you. If you didn't put the thing on the board and you didn't sign it out properly, people would come after you just to make sure you were safe. Which at first was annoying until I realised that actually this is really good. This is a good thing. I mean, they were a bit hacked off, but it was a great thing. And you do eventually get used to it. But that's my biggest impression of the first week, learning to move my name tag in the different buildings. The other thing was, I was in the giant's house, which is quite funny, because I'm not exactly a giant, but I was there to work on gigantism, and I'll say a little bit about that later on, because I really want to emphasise the living in Antarctica rather than just the working. But I thought that was quite nice, in the giant's house, working gigantism, so I took that picture. I'm not really one for big things like that, honest. Here's my bed. I just thought you'd like to see that. That's where, and you can pull this little cover across, and everything I owned was just in there. There's 4 of us. Now, that sounds good until you realise that there are some people who come in from deep field. Deep field means you've got geologists, folk who are working with various glaciers, and they've been out for months, and they come back. One of the things I realise is that if you are deep field, don't wash. It's really bad. And so a lot of them come back and you get these hairy creatures that you can sort of wander around and you can smell them coming. And certainly you can smell when they come in the bunk next to you. And then within a day, there's a human being there instead because they've showered and they've shaved and everything. I mean, it's amazing people who go to Antarctica. And of course on the base, there's 120 people on this base. Very few scientists. What you've got are electricians, cooks, woodworkers. You've got all these sorts of people who are there to make it all work, to do the logistics. And so it's quite an environment. And it's not just a whole bunch of, what did they call us, beakers, which is apparently a sort of derogatory term for a scientist from the Muppets. I didn't know that, thank goodness. So that's your world. That's your little world. I did have a section of a small cupboard here that I could put things in, but that's your world. And it's the same if you're a professor of marine zoology, or whether you're someone who's there fixing the electrics, or you're just a volunteer, helping clean the place up. It's actually quite a nice experience. That's the view when you're walking around. This is where you eat, and you walk around and just incredible. The whole time, you just have incredible beauty around about you. Still incredible danger, but incredible beauty as you're walking around. Planes come in and land here. This is where you go for, and you can go for breakfast, you can go for smoko. I don't know if any of you've got a military sort of background, you would recognise a lot of the stuff. Smoko apparently is a sort of, from what I can see, a main meal mid-morning. I mean, it's a bit like hobbits, you just can eat all the time if you really want to. And then you go for lunch, and then you go for a smoko in the afternoon, and then you go for tea at night, and then you can make toast. A toasting machine that always goes off and starts a major fire alarm. Moving the little tags is one thing. The other thing is that as you move from building to building, you basically have to undress each time. You're moving between buildings, and you can't wear your outside shoes in any of the buildings. So you go and you get into the building, you take your jacket off, you take your hat off, you take the scarf off, all the stuff, and hang it all up, take your shoes off and go into other shoes. And then you go and have some tea, and then you've got to go to another building, put it all back on again, out to the other building, get to that other building, take it all off again. And you just realise how much of your time is spent just getting undressed in front of lots of people you just don't know. It's a huge amount of time, and it becomes routine, but it takes a while. And at first, I found that the sort of free-spirited Scot in me rebelled against this. But you can't. You can't, because otherwise the place goes into absolute chaos, and that chaos is mess. And you don't get a chance to do mess. This is Simon Morley. Simon works for the British Antarctic Survey. He's a biologist, and when I arrived, he was mopping the floor. And he was mopping the floor because at least one day a week, everyone has to get involved in actually making sure the base is okay. That there are people who are employed to clean, but there's not this feeling of that's what they do. Everyone has to be involved. So here's Simon, who's an eminent scientist, and he's mopping the floor. And at least he's got a smile on his face, which is nice. You also have this thing where gash, again, if you've got any military background, you'll know what gash is. You spend a day and a half in the kitchens, cleaning up, running about, doing all sorts of really, literally crappy things. It's quite good fun because you get to know everyone. But yeah, washing up after 120 people when you've got breakfast, smoko, meal, it's quite a big thing. So a lot of your day is actually spent changing in and out of clothes, making sure your wee tag is right or running back because you've forgotten where it is, and tidying up. Even just getting around the base can be a bit of a pain. This is the way back to where I was living, which is fine. You'll notice that there are some things in the way. These are baby elephant seals, who for some reason like to be high, and I don't mean to take drugs, because they couldn't do that because their limbs aren't long enough, they couldn't get it to their mouth. What I mean by that is that they find the highest part of the base, it just so happens the highest part of the base are these bits where trucks drive over. Part of the Antarctic Treaty is that you don't go near animals like that, you don't disturb them unless you really have to. And certainly there's none of this stuff with polar bears, there's a polar bear and you get your gun out. There's none of that. It's just not done. If they're there and you find an alternative way home. And to be honest, you wouldn't want to do anything else. The smell of these animals is incredible. There's a bit of biology, and if any of you know that this isn't right, please tell me. But as you're walking by them, they go. And you just think, so are they cleaning their nose, you know, in a very undignified way, because they've got snot in it? Sorry for those who are, mucopolysaccharide in the nasal cavity. Or is there some other reason? And I asked someone back home why that was, because you would be next to them and they'd go, you just hear this horrible farting noise, excuse me, but that's what it was. And the person said, oh no, don't worry, it's not that they've got a cold. I think they're trying to get rid of the parasites that are in their nose. And you realise that you've been up close to them taking pictures, and these things go to get the parasites out of their nose. Now, I'm not sure if that's absolutely true, but it certainly has scratched for a long time afterwards. Recycling's big news. You think about it, this is a particular place where anything that comes in has to go out again in some form. It can't just be thrown away. The Antarctic Treaty says that you're not allowed, really, to trash the place, which is great news. Signed up to it by all the nations that are working in Antarctica. And so everything gets recycled, and the stuff that isn't recycled, it's a very small amount, comes back to Britain for landfill. The whole base is basically geared round recycling. It's a pain in the backside to do it properly. And again, I'm sorry to say that I really almost resented the fact that in the lab I had 7 bins in front of me and just trying to choose which bin to use, and you think, flipping it on, who cares? But of course, you should care, and I was made care because, confession, this will have to be cut out of this. I mean, there was one time I was busy trying to do things, we were going to move on, and I was busy with the science, and I just thought, stuff it, and I just put all the stuff in the bin. And the days that we were emptying the bin, the folk from the span, as it's called, drove down and said, someone here has put all this in the bin. And I came clean, but I had to go up to the span, I had to redo everything I'd done. And they were really nice about it. I mean, they weren't some Nazis or anything, but it was just a case of, this is what we do here, and if you're going to be here, that's part of the culture. And so I went through it and I took all the rubbish and I sorted it out, ate a bit of humble pie, and then they drove me back in a big digger, so that was okay. This is quite neat. This is, I mean, I never thought I would take pictures of generators. Absolutely fascinating generators. Particularly when you think if something goes wrong with them, you're 800 miles away from anywhere, and if the weather's bad, you're stuffed. All of a sudden it's really important. You get power cut here, and it's inconvenient, you know, you can't use your cooker or whatever. But there's just this feeling that they were redoing the generators. And I just took this picture because I thought, actually these are really important to me and everyone else in the base. If anything happens to them, this is sort of, it's like serious. You know, and things like that, it just makes a much bigger impression on you. Because all of a sudden, most of the stuff down here, as you'll see later on, all of it, I mean, I can almost hear the sort of Indiana Jones, this is serious in the background. Because it is. The generator's breaking, there's 3 of them, but one of them breaking. When we were there was a fire in one of them, and general alarm at 1:30 in the morning, and I just remember getting up and you have to muster and get ready, but you're not sure what's going on. The rumour goes round, there's a fire in the generator. Turned out it wasn't serious, but you don't know that when you're putting on all your clothes to go outside, and someone's saying to you, well, make sure, you know, we might have to fight some fires. And I'm thinking, how are you going to call the fire brigade from here? Of course, you're not. The people who are there are going to fight a fire. It turned out it was a very, very small fire. It was totally under control. Everything was fine, but you don't know that at 1:30 in the morning. You're waking up and you're thinking, what happens if this fire's serious? It's quite salutary. It really does make you think. And it's funny because it put my research into perspective. Because very often when you're into research, it's quite easy to get so focused, you know, that nothing else matters, sort of idea. And just living from day to day thinking, if you don't get this right, you or everyone else is in a lot of trouble. It's quite salutary. This is the view from my bedroom window. And this is a bay. This is Ryder Bay where we did a lot of the work. You'll notice that it's totally packed with icebergs. One of the things that surprised me was when in the morning when all the folk who were diving and the folk who were going out in boats, they would get together and they would say, what's the wind doing today? What's the wind doing today? And at first I thought, yeah, whoa, what's the wind doing today? I'm just so excited. Why are you excited about the wind? Well, because if the wind blows that direction, this is clear water. If the wind blows from this direction, all of a sudden the whole place is packed with really, really big icebergs. And if you're diving, or if you're out in a small boat, or you're out in the islands which are beyond here, don't look that far away, you are in real trouble. And so knowing the direction of the wind and what's happening, there are 2 or 3 meteorologists on the base, and they are your friends, and you like them a lot, and you listen to what they say, and the direction of the wind is probably the thing that made the biggest impression on me, apart from the tide, which will come to see this clear in a couple of hours. And then the wind direction changes and all of a sudden it's full again, just in a few hours. It's astounding, and these are big bergs. The water that's just off here is extremely deep. It just goes right the way down very, very quickly, many hundreds of meters. And so you get some really big bergs coming in here. This is the lab, the Bonner lab, where all the experimental work was done. So you see I had a bit of a walk in the morning to get to work. This island here is actually too far to go with the small boats that we've got. It looks quite close, but it's just too far to go to. And these little islands here, you can go, and it's beautiful. I'll show you some pictures of them in a minute. Midnight. Anyone have any idea what that is? It wasn't here. There's no dogs allowed in here. This is looking down to the pier. This is an American ship that's come in. You can see it's definitely staying in because it's full of ice. This is just after midnight. This was the darkest it got for the first 3 weeks there. That was the absolute darkest. And the sun almost disappeared below the horizon. Strange thing to see the sun coming down and seemingly bounce off the horizon and bounce back up again. And it gets lighter from sort of mid 1 o'clock onwards. But sometimes it was like Glasgow. It rained and it absolutely poured down. Now, very, very rarely does it rain in Antarctica. It's one of the driest places. It's a desert. But this particular day, it was like being in Glasgow. It wasn't quite as cold as Scotland, but it was. It was dreadful to feel the rain. This is us running down to go to work quickly. Snowing, that felt a bit better. This is HMS Protector. HMS Protector is a British Navy ship which is built for Antarctic work, and it regularly comes down to not just patrol the waters but help with hydrography, help with biology. There are people on board who will dive and do biology for you, so they work really closely with the British Antarctic Survey. And this is the Protector coming in to see us with a friend of mine on board. I love this book in the library, The Worst Case Scenario Survival Handbook. That was all I did with it. I just didn't have the heart to look inside it in case it told me something that was going to scare me so much I wouldn't be able to work or do anything else. Every once in a while you get an iceberg going by, and this is the pier, and this iceberg goes by, and you just think, if that hits the pier's gone. I mean, it's really, really big. And this is a relatively small one that's going by, but the people who were about to go and try and rebuild the pier, that's them, and they were saying, we have to build it to protect it from icebergs. And here's an iceberg going by. I said, you should go down and have a look at it now, there's an iceberg going by. And they're all standing there with selfies and everything else. Training is a huge element, and I suppose I didn't realise how much of my life was going to be dedicated to being trained for this. Girton College, as I said, is a place that you go for basic training and a whole suite of things, but particularly first aid. But once you get there, you still get training and training and training, and you couldn't go there for a week. I mean, you wouldn't anyway. No one's that stupid to travel for 3 days there and 3 days back again and only stay for a week. But you couldn't, because the first week is really just, you're in training, and you're expected to take it seriously, and rightly so. And this is the doctor. One of the nice things about being a doctor on a base like this is you don't actually get to practice very much. Now that sounds a bit crazy, but everyone down here has to go through a thorough medical check, and so they have to arrive pretty healthy. And there's a whole load of stuff to stop you hurting yourself, although people go skiing, they go in all sorts of things, but by and large there's very little problems. So the doctors spend a lot of time organising parties and talks and stuff, which is great, which is a wonderful thing. When it does go wrong, they certainly work, and it's, yeah, they earn their money. I love this, the fact that not only is Antarctica isolated in terms of biology, where you have all this biology that's sort of 40 million years in the making, surrounded by the circumpolar current, but there's all sorts of stuff in little cupboards from the 1930s, 40s, 50s and 60s. And it's a little sort of time capsule, and I just love this. I mean, for those of you who are a bit younger, you have no idea what this is, but take my word for it. Let's go straight to the heart. This is stuff that was old when I was a kid and sort of knew it. And you know, the climber for rambling, 1964. All sorts of things sort of lying around. So here you have a place which is really, really modern in terms of the science that's being done. But every once in a while you come across stuff which is quite ancient but doesn't make it feel ancient. No, it's quite beautiful. You have to learn to drive these gators. And that's part of the training. You have to learn, and they take you down, they put you on and show you how to do it. And they're relatively easy to drive once you get the hang of them. I didn't like the fact that they parked them at the top of a hill, so if you went into reverse, you went down the hill backwards. I don't think I ever did that, which is good. This is Hugh, who is a really fine naturalist as well as a scientist with bass. And of course these things, these jet skis, they teach you to use these. I mean, who wants to go on a jet ski when you're a marine biologist? No, bird biologists, yes, but not marine biologists. You learn to use them for recreation, but also just in case, because you just don't know what's going to happen. Things around the base. That's the view from the laboratory window. It's actually quite difficult to do some work when you keep on looking out and seeing this. Glaciers. I really thought, having lived in Canada for a few years, that I'd had my fill of glaciers. But here, they're just everywhere, and they are out of this world. Nothing that I saw in Canada prepared me for just the glaciers. And just to look out across the water and to see these huge glaciers, when you're up close to them, they are magnificent. Dangerous, but magnificent. And there's just so many. So, I mean, the first one of the things I did was just try to count how many glaciers there were, gave up, went to a map, and there are just hundreds and hundreds everywhere. And just incredibly beautiful. And they're changing throughout the day. So you'll be working, but every once in a while you just stop, and they look different. I was surprised how many pictures I took of just glaciers. You know, and afterwards I got back and Fiona, my wife, said, why did you take some pictures all the same? And they did sort of look the same in the photographs, but they didn't at the time. And I was trying to sort of almost capture what was going on in my own mind, and didn't manage it. Just incredible. I mean, it's difficult to get the scale of this. This is like a huge cliff along here. And I mean a really huge cliff that leaves the stuff that's along the south coast here really looking tiny. You can go relatively close to them, but you do have to be careful because they move and bits fall off them. The bits falling off them sound as if God has come and just taken a bit of the mountain, like, photom. That's what it feels like. You hear it and you feel it as bits fall off. And it's quite a thing. I love that one. It's beautiful. This is looking out. This is the same piece of water that I showed you, full of icebergs. You can see it's nice and clear. And here's some of the islands that a lot of the biologists go out to. You can actually go out just to get away from the base for a while. And there's a little sort of hut there that's secure. But I mean, we were going to collect stuff. Incredibly beautiful when it's like this. Not so good when the wind direction changes and the ice comes back. This is my bird biologist again. We spent, every day we would try and walk twice round the peninsula and just look at the stuff that was there. And you know, every day it was different, with small ice floes here. You look across, this is 20 miles away, you know, and all the way down there, you've just got glacier after glacier after glacier. Some places that actually haven't been visited at all across in that land. I did hear that sometimes in the winter, people will actually walk across or ski across to that land, which is quite a brave thing to do, really. Here's a place that lets you remember that you don't muck around here. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't mean that you don't have fun. These guys know how to party. Boy, do they know how to party. But you don't muck around, because there's a little part of the highest part of the peninsula where people who have lost their lives are commemorated. And every day you would go there and just think, goodness, this is quite serious. A young girl, a young geologist, who was taken by a leopard seal diver. And you just think, that's just dreadful. Dreadful but beautiful, absolutely beautiful. This is one of the few pictures I got where it sort of looks the way I remember it. And even then it's nothing. I'm showing you it, and it's difficult because you really would have to be there, just with the way that the light is caught on the ice. Everything is changing. And it's incredibly beautiful, and then you think, it can't be any more beautiful, and the light changes again, and you're just astounded by it. That's the other side of the water. It goes all the way down for hundreds and hundreds of miles. Here's the sun actually almost again dipping down below the horizon, but not quite. And that's the way I remember it for the first month. Literally sitting there, you've got humpbacks coming in, you've got all sorts of seals coming in, but really, the scenery itself was just so arresting. People, because of course it's very nice, scenery's great, but have you ever noticed it's not so good if you don't have someone there with you? It's interesting that we all seem to have a need to worship, and by that I mean have someone alongside you. When you see something you say, isn't that amazing? Isn't that cool? You almost need someone to do that rather than just do it yourself. And people down there, everyone who's there wants to be there. Everyone who's there realises that if you don't act as a community, you're in trouble. And you feel that when you're there. You feel that you've got a real community. This is Ali Masson, who has done goodness knows how many summers down there now. She looks after the lab. She's brilliant at it and just loves it. Someone who's really happy with her own company, but at the same time is actually brilliant with people and makes the lab work. Without her, you wouldn't do any science, really. Amazing. This is Simon again, smiling. I think we've managed to get something sorted out. That was good. Coffee time. Now, there's coffee in here. No table here. We have a corridor that you sit in the lab. And you're sitting with people from every nation possible. And folk who have been there, some of them for 18 months, and actually not really been anywhere else at the time. Just a little sort of human story for you. Now, this guy here, really interesting, because when I saw him, I thought, I recognise you. We lived in Sheffield, and him as a 2-year-old used to sit in the rocking chair that our kids played on, banging the side of the skirting board to really wind us up. Here he is in Antarctica. It was really nice to call his mum and get to talk to his mum from Antarctica. A little human interest story. This is Saz Reid, who's one of the marine biology students who studied at Plymouth, and this is her, the Adelie penguins. One of the things that really, really touched me was how many people, both from the university and from Plymouth generally, who had actually contributed to what goes on down there, and particularly the undergraduates. I'm not just talking about famous scientists who have contributed, I'm talking about the undergraduates who have gone down and made things work. And Saz is one of them. Terry Suster has just finished her PhD with Bass, probably one of the most experienced Antarctic divers in the world. She's one of our students. Lots and lots of our students. At the MBA here, you've got folk who spend time down there. And it's quite wonderful to go to the other end of the world, to literally the other end of the world, most isolated, and you know that people that you've been involved with and that you know personally have made such a difference to what's going on there. It's great, particularly as a lecturer who's taught folk. I mean, no matter where I go in the world, meeting folk that I've taught, I find is an amazing experience. It humbles me to watch them. I mean, one of my students just recently, April Stabbins, she's just gone down in the Alvin, you know, which is the submersible to go down to the mid-oceanic ridge, and she just wrote saying, "Hey, guess where I've gone?" Thank you for that. And, okay, so you've got everyday life. Every once in a while you get someone who's doing their research, is about to leave, and they come and they give a talk, a popular talk. Now, I've never been to so many smart, popular talks in my life as down here, where you've got folk who are leading glaciologists, leading climate change scientists, and they're coming, and they're just talking to everyone as if you're in the front room. And you're hearing people who really are at the forefront of all sorts of different fields, not just biology, talking about what they're doing. And that was actually great fun. This is the means of delivering sustenance from one of the American ships, the Gould, that comes in. The Gould comes in every year. I'm not going to tell you all the details of the Gould. Yeah, simple as that. And basically they have a big party, and they do up one of the sort of barns as a place where they have live music, and it's good. Really good live music and all sorts of things. And the Americans bring a whole load of stuff to drink, which is very nice. Another sort of drink. Here's the Padre who's from HMS Protector, serving communion in the wake of everything that's there. And that's quite an experience. That's quite an experience as well. And here's this guy, and he's got all this sort of majesty behind him, and he talks about the majesty of, you know, God creating all this, and there's all this stuff behind. It's slightly different. Slightly different. It was interesting that the people who went along to what he did, some of them were religious, some of them were not. Very, very different people, but just the idea of joining in and what was going on. This is my friend Richard. Richard was the doctor on board the HMS Protector. Interestingly enough, he said to me, I've got to go down south. You know, I wanted to go down south. I said, I'm down south as well. When are you going? All right, I wonder if we could meet up. And we did. We actually managed to get together. It was a bit like sort of Livingston and Stanley, you know, doctor, I presume. And here's me taking him for a walk around at the top of the peninsula. Really lovely to have someone who's a very good friend who's there. For the folk who stayed there, they had that routinely. When you stay for 18 months with people, you make very, very firm friendships, and you could tell the people who'd been there for 18 months versus the sort of 2 or 3 month people like me. But I felt a little bit of it when Richard came to join me, and all of a sudden you've got someone who knows you, and you're one of the most spectacular and dangerous places in the world, and it's just really special. This is on board HMS Protector. Boy, can the British Navy do a really decent barbecue, even when it's really cold. And this is just a huge barbecue that we had. It's just great. When ships come in, it's, you know, sometimes there's pleasure cruises come in, and you'll see a lot of the people in the base will try and go and help, so they can go to the jacuzzis and the swimming pools and everything else. Wildlife. Lichens. It's just amazing. All these lichens. That's the thing that really blew me away. You're crawling in rocks, you know, in somewhere that is genuinely barren, and there's just all these lichens everywhere, and there's tiny little creatures in them. Now, I showed the students this and enthused, and I've never seen so many people looking at me very strangely. I just was amazed that you find these creatures, these long-lived creatures, these long-lived organisms, and they do really well here. In some ways, unfortunately, they're doing very well because the place is warming up. It's one of the most warming places on Earth. That's slowed down within the last 10 years, but slowed down so that it's still only 2 or 3 times faster than the rest of the world, rather than 6 or 7. And so the lichens both fascinating me because they were there, but also realising that they were going to do quite well in the next little while as the Antarctic Peninsula rushes ahead into warming at a rate that we are not yet experiencing. Adelie penguins. Do you know, these were amazing. This is a picture from the Margarita Bay. It's from the voyage of the Pourquoi Pas. That was the French ship that I told you that went down exploring here. This is the Pourquoi Pas here. It's really neat when you read the account. I read the account because I knew quite a few of the places. And they're just so pleased that they lost so few people. When you read about the people who were killed, you know, as they were trying to stop the icebergs hit the ship on the way down. And you know, we only lost 2 people. Isn't that good? You think, flipping it, these people are tough. You know? And this is really not that far from where we were. They're out looking at the Adelie penguins. This is my first encounter of Adelie penguins running down the runway. Just such a bad idea, really. It was never going to happen. And they run up and down the runway, and you can't chase them away. You know, basically they would stop a plane landing. If there's seals or penguins there, then the animals' rights are respected. I mean, that's where they are. This is one that I made friends with. It was there every day that I went round, and I just loved it. And I was about to take this picture of this because it's embarrassing, but I can't help it. They don't do a lot, right? I mean, there are chin-strap penguins that are quite nice. The Adelie penguins are really quite small and quite cute, I must confess. But all they do is they go, oh, oh. And so I thought, I wonder if that means anything. If I do the same, will I get any reaction? So I'm standing next to this one going, oh, and it went, So one of the nice things about being isolated in the Antarctic is no one was there to see that. This penguin would go, oh, and we go, oh. The only other movement they made, this one, I went, oh, and it went. And each day it was really just. That was the other movement they made. That was quite spectacular for the first couple of times. Adelie penguins coming on shore to molt, and their molts actually, I mean, they made quite a mess of the place. You can see that a couple of seals here as well, looking across the Pourquoi Pas. Those elephant seals, the juveniles, the ones I showed you are juveniles, even though they're pretty big. They go into the water and they practice battering 7 bells at one another. This is a couple of juveniles that just went into the water and start hitting one another and trying to bite one another's neck. And basically they're preparing for when they're older, they're males, when in fact they'll actually fight for harems. I actually found that it was different from I thought. I mean, I've seen video of the adults fighting, but to see these sort of young Turks, you know, preparing and sort of, it was pretend fighting, but the wounds were real. And I still don't really know what to make of that. I mean, yeah. And here, they are. I mean, sometimes you get 7 of them sitting across a bridge and you're stuffed. You have to go the long way around. They are... But they're allowed to do that. If they're outside your window, it's not a lot of fun. Both the smell and the noise. I mean, okay, I'm a little overweight, but when these animals move, I mean, they sort of just lurch, and it's like, as the blubber, as the fat moves, and it's absolutely disgusting. So, around them, all you've got is and it's really unpleasant. I did like looking at them up close. I love this. This is one of the things that sort of surprised me. You know, I think of flippers as proper flippers, you know, and flat paddles. But of course, these animals have got pentadactyl limbs, which I sort of always knew. But to watch this creature that's just sitting, and then all of a sudden it just sort of pulls its flipper, its hand across, and you can just scratching its eye in the same way as you would if it was just a bit itchy. And it actually didn't look very marine mammal-y at that time. This is a sub-adult. This creature was sitting halfway around the island, and it didn't do a lot. Certainly when you looked up close, that's why it's called the elephant seal. And the smell that comes away from that animal when it's cleaning its nose or just being there is really quite revolting. contrast that with Weddell seals. Weddell seals are the most attractive creatures you've ever seen, even though the whales like them for other reasons. Incredibly beautiful and graceful, and they're everywhere, absolutely everywhere. Sea lions too. This one here is barking at me. Someone once told me that sea lions were like dogs, and I was going round the island, round the peninsula by myself, and I didn't realise that this one was sitting, lying down. And as you sort of jump from rock to rock, because it's quite jagged and angular, and I just missed jumping in this creature, so it got a fright, I got a fright. At this point, it jumped up, went just like our dog at home, and I got a real panic because I had heard stories that they will bite you. So this thing's barking at me, and we're right next to one another because I've almost stood on it. And I thought, what do I do? What do I do with the dog at home? So I just went, ah! And I went, and again, you feel really stupid, but you don't know what's going to happen. I mean, they do bite you. It's okay. I was really stupid, really sort of reactionary, but none of us were hurt apart from my pride and its pride. These creatures, these are leopard seals. This is us coming alongside a floe that's got a leopard seal on it. When you see them, they look a bit awkward. They can slide along like a snake on an ice floe faster than you can run. They are creatures that you have real respect for. When you're diving, doing work, the leopard seals, people have to look out for leopard seals. They are quite literally deadly, not just to other wildlife. And they're big. I think that's the thing that surprised me, is just how big these creatures are and how fast they can move, even being that big. Very few birds. This is a skua which would go to the top of the island, but very few birds, particularly this year. My friend Richard, I was asking why there were so few birds, and he just wasn't sure. He'd come for 2 weeks to do a bird survey, and it didn't take very long. This is the picture I'm really proud of. I am to photography what Attila the Hun is to art. And I took this picture, and I'm really chuffed with it. Wait till you see the background. Look at that. I took that for my daughter and didn't realise just how beautiful it was with the Weddell and the Adelie penguin and the glacier behind it. And in some ways that summed up for me a lot of what the wildlife was like. Spectacular, remote, different, very different, and incredibly beautiful. Work, remember work, that's the reason I was there. Getting to lie in water at 0 degrees is great fun, as long as you don't have to do it for too long. You've got a survival suit on, you don't want to wear a wetsuit or a dry suit. Wetsuit for obvious reasons. Dry suit will probably get torn. So you're sort of lying there, well, reclining more in a sort of Romanesque fashion. Trying to get tiny little amphipods related to beach fleas and sandhoppers. Just great fun. Absolutely great fun. Mainly because the icebergs are far away. Compare this one. This is us collecting in the intertidal zone. The picture is taken by some people who are doing all the safety stuff. You've got someone who's looking out for leopard seals, and if they say leopard seal, then you're out, no matter what you're doing, no matter how important you think the science is, you're out. There's a leopard seal there, you have to move away. That's simple, straightforward. The thing I wasn't ready for was that you get these tidal surges. There are tide tables, but they're really just for show, from what I can see. Because every once in a while you get this tidal surge, and these birds, which are sitting on rocks, rise up off the rocks, and they run towards you. So you've got someone, 2 people up here as well, who are looking to see what the ice is doing and what direction it's going in. Never has intertidal sampling felt just quite so edgy. This is, the ice has just all moved into the area that we were in. This was relatively clear. This is me just finishing off the sampling before all the water basically disappears because the ice has moved in. You get to play around in boats. I mean, this isn't just James Bond zooming around. You are going to places to work, but it's quite important that you go there relatively quickly because of the sort of climate situation. It's just incredibly beautiful. And the folk who are working, who man the boats and do the diving, very good at what they do because they get plenty of practice. this was relatively clear. You can see here it's beginning to not be terribly clear, and they're looking for a way around. That's the situation, which can be really quite dangerous. Very rarely do people get into those situations because people are very safety conscious. Diving. Now, this is Simon and the guy who's going to dive for some animals that I wanted. If you go underwater, okay, you've got some penguins and you've got some seals and stuff. As soon as you go underwater, the diversity and beauty of what's there is just stunning. Really, really stunning. Lots of sponges, lots of sea cucumbers, sponges, and incredibly beautiful, almost packed in a picturesque disorder, which belies the fact that you're in one of the most sort of, not just remote, but one of the toughest places on earth. The wildlife under the water is spectacular in a way that it's difficult to put into words, and it's different over very, very small spatial scales. And considering that here, if you want to go as deep as 70 or 80 metres, you really need a ROV. There's a fellow doing his PhD there just now, and he's using a ROV to go to 70, 80 metres and see what's there. Just incredibly beautiful. This is us going onto one of the small islands. You can see the islands populated by seals that are lying about everywhere. This is This is the little hut that, if you want a bit of a break, you can go there and stay in the hut for a day or two, or if the weather turns bad, a week. We were there looking for intertidal amphipods. It's only within the last 10 years that we've begun to realise that there's actually an intertidal fauna there. Because what with the ice scour and everything else, it's difficult to believe that anything could be intertidal. And that intertidal work has actually been done by people who are now here at the MBA and many other of our students. Amazing there to see intertidal animals, to be honest. This is not intertidal, this is a sea spider, giant sea spider, and that's one of the features about Antarctica. Because it's been isolated for so long, there are species of sea spider, of amphipod, which I'll show you in a minute, which are gigantic. And that's the reason I was there. I was interested in the fact that you get gigantic animals. And in 1999, Lloyd Peck, who belongs to the Antarctic Survey, he published a paper with Guy Chappelle saying that the reason you got giant animals in polar regions was because the oxygen was high. I wrote a paper which basically said that might be right, but your mechanism's wrong. And a lifelong feud and friendship started as a result of that paper. And it was Lloyd who actually said to me, you need to go down to Antarctica and actually do some empirical work rather than just argue about the ins and outs of this. So that's what I was interested in, the fact that you have gigantic animals. This is where you find my gigantic animals. It's not quite as spectacular as the one I've just shown you. This is the boulder shore. And I could show you boulder shores all over the world, and they all look the same really. It's just a boulder shore, but it's 6 metres deep. You look underneath them, and you have these tiny little creatures, except this isn't that tiny. This is a couple of centimetres long. This is a beach hopper, but it's big. It's about this size. Called Paracerodocus. And there's a whole load of others of different sizes as well. Even under the one rock, you have creatures which are many centimetres long, and you've got creatures which are less than 1 millimetre, and they're all related to one another. So for someone who wants to look at animals of different sizes and try and look at the physiology, how they work, and answer questions about what makes them gigantic, it's perfect. This group is perfect. And the paper that Lloyd that published in 1999 was on amphipods. These creatures, amphi, many, poda, feet. I've shown you lots of pictures of outside. If you want to proportion by time, 80% of it, 85% of it was in this room. That's it. That's what I saw most in the Antarctic. This room, which was set at a particular temperature, and I was able to do bits of science. And for most of the time, if you said to the nearest approximation, what did you spend all your time doing? That was what I was doing. That was it. Now, for any of you who have done science, you know that that's what it is. The result of science can be spectacular, but the process of science, you can watch a tea towel dry and it's more interesting. It's really the result that you do it for. And that's what most of my time was. So, not only did I travel to the Antarctic Peninsula and only see a tiny little part, a couple of kilometres by a couple of kilometres, but even within that, I spent all my time in a human-made room at a particular temperature, watching tiny little amphipods. Certainly not that tiny. 1 centimetre, here's Paracerodocus, Proserpingia brevicornis. Now, a guy called T.R.R. Stebbing in the 1900s did the Challenger expedition, and the amphipods from the Challenger expedition, and he wrote in the introduction to it, no panegyrist of the amphipoda has yet been able to evoke popular enthusiasm in their favour. What does that mean in sort of proper English? It means these creatures are dull, no one's ever going to be interested in them. And yet, these are absolutely ideal for answering questions about gigantism. What Lloyd put forward in 1999 was that the reason you got gigantic animals in polar regions was because there was more oxygen. The nice thing about that is you can test that. There are good predictions, and one of the predictions is that the large animals, if you actually reduce the oxygen around about them and look at their performance, they shouldn't perform quite as well as the very small animals if this oxygen limitation hypothesis holds. So that's what I went out to test. I went out to test the performance of these animals when you reduced oxygen and see if the largest ones didn't do as well as the small ones. That's the whole reason for going out. This is a plate which is in Punta Arenas, showing the Antarctic Peninsula. The reason it's here is because it's saying this is the Antarctic region that belongs to Chile, and we were there. One of the amazing things, and one of the things that surprised me most about being in Antarctica, was not just the work, not just the living there, but the way that the whole continent is actually organised. In the 1940s, an American guy called Gould tried to put together a treaty which all the different countries could agree to about how to look after Antarctica and look after it for science. And to a large extent, over the next 20 years, he managed to put that together. We still have it, the Antarctic Treaty. What did he do? This here, Chile says it belongs to them. If you go back and look at the accounts at Scott's time, and after that, that belongs to Britain. If you talk to the Argentinians, it belongs to the Argentinians. You have a chance of real conflict occurring. This is just one small part of Antarctica. And what Gould and the people after him did was that they got all of the nations involved, and there must have been about 50 nations, to agree not to renounce their rights on the Antarctic, but to put them aside and say, we leave it aside and we protect it. And so you have all these nations from the 1960s onwards signing up to the Antarctic Treaty that you don't use it for testing, you don't destroy it, it's for science, all these things, and it sort of works. There must be very few places on Earth where you've had such agreement by so many different nations, in particular ones where the claims are actually so heartfelt, and it works. And I think that part's wonderful. What scares me, and it's the thing that I took away from Antarctica, was that the Antarctic Treaty is up for renewal relatively soon. And it'll be interesting to see whether the spirit that was around that actually made the treaty is going to be around to keep it going when there's just so much money to be made there. It's a place which is unique. It's incredibly beautiful. It's a sort of barometer of what's happening on our Earth. And if those negotiations go wrong, it will disappear, even without climate change. And so I left Antarctica, being blown away by the place, coming back with some really neat science, which I've only now worked out what I found out. Typical science, isn't it? 9 months later you actually find out what you found out. But more than anything else, realising that this world that I'm on, that my children are inheriting, really is fragile. The only other time I felt that was when, as a kid, watching Apollo 8, when they saw the Earth rise, and it just looked so sort of fragile. And flying out from Antarctica and just seeing it and thinking, goodness, within my lifetime, certainly within my children's lifetime, we could choose to destroy this place. It still made a big impression and hasn't gone away. Thank you very much. shameless thing. I mean, I wouldn't have been able to do that if the Natural Environmental Research Council hadn't given me a grant to do it. It's really expensive to send someone to Antarctica, and I'm just so grateful that they thought it was worthwhile sending me down, and feel free to do it again. Giving a talk at the National Marine Aquarium, same title as the Marine Biologist Antarctica, but this time what I want to do is, I was so taken with the impact that people from Plymouth, from folk associated with the Scott expedition onwards to the present day, have actually made, that I wanted to give a talk which was not just about what I thought about Antarctica, but looking at what those people have contributed, my reflections on what they've contributed. I wanted to try and recognise the contribution of Plymouth as a place, and the people who are here, in actually forming what was on Antarctica. The very first decent marine biology that was done in the Antarctic continent, arguably, was done by the person who was the first curator of the museum here in Plymouth. And I think it's really good to explore that and just be a little bit more proud about what we've actually got here. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you very much, John. That was fantastic. Does anyone have any questions?
Some questions, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Don't get away that easily.
Like, can I go to Antarctica? That's what most people ask me. No, you can't.
What were the results of your experiment? Did you find out?
It's really neat because for years Lloyd and I have disagreed over whether the oxygen drives gigantism or not. And I gave a talk when I first came back, when I had half of the data analysed, and it looked as if it wasn't supporting the idea of the oxygen being related. Now that I've actually finished all the analysis, it's worked out really, really nicely. It turns out that let's see, I can go back. That this animal doesn't perform as well as this animal, which doesn't perform as well as this animal. But it's only 3 species, right? But the real beauty is this thing, Prostobingia brevicornis. When you see it, it really frightened the living daylights out of me, because you think Antarctic species, the sea spiders. And you just think, these things shoot about. They shoot about in the same way as you would get if you put someone to tank downstairs at 15 degrees, and they're, you just think, that's pretty neat. How do they do it? Well, this animal actually performs fairly well. It performs much better than you'd expect for the size of it. But this is the only one that's got a respiratory pigment in it. This is the only one which these plates here, it can breathe through. The rest of them don't have that. It's got extra branchial surfaces, it's got extra bag to its buck when it's taking oxygen up. And so this animal bucks the trend. It's actually much better than it should be for its size, but it's done that because it's made additional structures. And the hypothesis that Lloyd put forward was that, the prediction that was from the hypothesis was that larger animals shouldn't perform as well under hypoxic conditions, all other things being equal. Well, with this creature, all other things are definitely not equal. It's got a set of adaptations which allow it to buck the trend, which in a sense adds further fuel to the fire that it is body size that's driving it, but there are ways of overcoming it. So that's quite cool.
Any others? Did you have one somewhere down the front?
I had the same question.
Ah, right. Any other questions then?
So just one actually.
Yeah.
Sorry, slightly negative, mate. But did you see any evidence of plastic pollution in the water while you were over there?
Yeah, do you know? Some of our students collected some stuff for Richard Thompson and found plastic pollution between the rocks and in the sediments. What surprised me is I didn't see anything. Yeah, I literally didn't see anything, either big bits of plastic or small parts. I was sort of expecting to see that a little bit,
Yeah.
but and I did look, because the amphipods are all living between the sediments. I did sort of look, and I couldn't find anything, which sort of delighted me really. But it is there.
Yeah.
But it is there.
Yeah.
And one of my jobs, I told you on the Friday you had to tidy up and stuff. One of my jobs was to walk down all the different roads that had been built and pick up any little bits of plastic that we had deposited, while working, or nails and things. And that was my sort of job, picking up all these things, which meant that for the Antarctic Treaty, if someone came to inspect, because any country can come and inspect you, there was no plastic, there was stuff lying about the base. And you could say it's a token gesture to show your heart's in the right place, but what a good token gesture. So it's there, but I didn't see it. Yeah.
What are the sort of, is that the only scientific station in the Antarctic, or are there others?
There's tons of them.
Yeah.
There's absolutely tons of them. During the winter, there's probably about 1,000 people on the continent. That's their winter. During their summer, it rises to about 5,000. There must be 50, 60 different bases.
I was listening to something on Radio 4, a thing called The Life Scientific.
Yeah.
And they interviewed a lady, I can't remember how long ago it was, I think it's probably in the last 3 to 6 months.
Yeah.
And she'd gone down looking for leopard seals.
Yeah.
And they were, this area that she was meant to be surveying, it was allegedly devoid of leopard seals, but she actually used microphones to capture their calls.
Yeah.
Which sort of struck me. I was sort of starting to get a bit confused then, because from what you were saying, they're not uncommon, but presumably different parts of the continent, they are less common, or they don't make themselves so visible.
I mean, you think about it, we talk about Antarctica, it's twice the size and more of Australia. You know, so to talk about what's happening in Antarctica is a bit sort of, it's almost comical.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's like being in San Francisco and talking about what's happening, you know, all over the sort of American Greenland sort of idea. And so it does vary. Certainly the Adelie penguins are not doing as well. And they're the most southerly species, and they're not doing terribly well. The other more sort of subpolar species are moving down and taking the place of the Adelie penguins. So there are changes going on. The leopard seals, there were lots of them. Quite a few times the dives were called off just because there was leopard seals kicking around. And they can move so fast.
I didn't realise until you said how dangerous they were for humans.
I mean, see, it's risk, isn't it? I wouldn't like to say they're not dangerous, given that young girl was diving and the creature obviously maybe mistook her for a penguin or something like that and killed her. So, and that's dreadful. And you could say it's a chance occurrence. Yeah. But you know.
But it happened.
It happened. And if you read, it's funny because having sort of encountered that there, I read Shackleton's book South, and there's a part where he talks about them being faced by a leopard seal, and this person just managed to shoot it just in time, and he gives quite a detailed description of them all running about the ice floe trying to get it to go particular ways, and certainly they thought it was dangerous, and from the account it sounded pretty dangerous. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is anyone else have anything they'd like to ask? Okay, well, can everyone join me in just thanking John again? That was